When my husband's affair ended in pregnancy, his family told me to leave. I didn't argue. I said one sentence and watched their faces go pale. Their apologies came too late. The pregnant woman was sitting in my mother's chair. Not a chair I'd bought, not some IKEA piece I'd forgotten about. My mother's chair. The high-backed ivory armchair she'd reupholstered herself 3 times over 30 years. The one with the faint coffee ring on the left armrest from the morning she died. The ring I'd never cleaned because it felt like the last thing she'd ever touched. And there sat Ariane, 24 years old, 7 months swollen, wide brown eyes doing their best impression of innocence, with one manicured hand resting on her stomach and the other tracing the embroidered edge of that armrest like she was already pricing it. I stood in the doorway of my own living room and counted 6 people who had no right to be there. 6 people who had let themselves in using the spare key my husband kept on his keychain. 6 people who had, apparently, helped themselves to my good tea. And I thought, they have no idea what they just walked into. I smiled. Not the smile of a woman who finds something funny. The smile of someone sitting very still at a poker table while holding cards that would make the dealer weep. Let me back up, because you need to understand what this house means before you can understand what happened in it that evening. My name is Maria Concepcion de los Reyes Villanueva, though after everything I'm about to tell you, only the first half of that name still belongs to me, and I'm keeping it with both fists. I am 31 years old. I am a licensed CPA working as a senior financial analyst at a property development firm. I am the daughter of Elena de los Reyes, who built this house in Quezon City with money she'd saved for 11 years, working double shifts as a nurse in Saudi Arabia. She came home with calloused hands, a bad knee, and a single dream, that her daughter would never, ever have to beg anyone for shelter. My mother was not a romantic woman. She was practical in the way that women who've survived hard things become practical, efficient, unsentimental, and always 3 steps ahead of disaster. When I told her I was marrying Adrian Villanueva, she said 2 things. The first was, he has a soft face. Watch men with soft faces. The second was, this house stays in your name. I thought she was being dramatic. I signed the papers anyway because she insisted, because she was paying the lawyer, and because arguing with Elena de los Reyes about property law was approximately as productive as arguing with a wall about load-bearing capacity. She died 14 months after the wedding. Breast cancer, diagnosed late, moved fast. I held her hand at 4:17 in the morning on a Tuesday, and she told me, in a voice barely above breath, "The house, Maria. Don't be soft." I wasn't soft. Adrian was, though. I saw it early and chose to call it kindness. His easygoing charm, his inability to hold a hard conversation, his habit of disappearing into himself when things got uncomfortable. I told myself these were manageable quirks. I told myself I was strong enough for both of us. 5 years I believed that. 5 years I funded his ventures. The restaurant that closed in 8 months. The logistics startup that hemorrhaged money for 2 years before he sold it, meaning he walked away from debts I helped him clear. The consulting firm that consisted mostly of Adrian taking clients to lunch on our joint credit card and calling it networking. I wasn't blind, but I was invested. Sunk cost fallacy wearing the face of loyalty. I noticed the small things. The nights he came home smelling not like himself. The way he began sleeping on his side of the bed with a deliberateness that felt architectural, as if he were constructing a wall between us 1 centimeter at a time. The phone that was suddenly always face down. The business trip to Davao in March that his colleague accidentally mentioned happened last November. Each time I told myself a story. He's stressed. The business. He needs space. I was so busy being reasonable that I nearly missed the whole thing. The first crack I couldn't paper over happened on a Wednesday in September. I came home early, 3:30 in the afternoon, which almost never happened because our office building lost power and they sent us home. I remember the exact quality of the light that afternoon, honey-colored and thick, the kind that makes everything look more peaceful than it is. I found a receipt on the kitchen counter, not hidden, just sitting there, lazy and careless, the way guilty things often reveal themselves, not through dramatic exposure but through someone's simple failure to be careful enough. Hotel Seda, BGC, September 8th, deluxe room, 2 nights, room service, dinner for 2, breakfast for 2. Adrian had told me he was at a team building seminar in Tagaytay from the 7th to the 9th. My hands didn't shake. That surprised me. I'd always imagined this moment. Most women in long marriages run the scenario at some point, that horrible hypothetical, and I'd imagined collapsing, screaming, some operatic devastation. Instead, I took a photo of the receipt with my phone, put it exactly where I found it, and went to our bedroom to sit on the edge of the bed. I sat there for 2 hours. I did not cry. I thought about my mother. Then I thought about lawyers. I want to be precise about what happened next, because this is where most women in my position make the mistake of moving too fast or too loud. I didn't confront Adrian. I know that sounds cold. But here's what I understood in those 2 hours on the edge of the bed. A confronted man becomes a defensive man, and a defensive man destroys evidence. Instead, the following morning, I called Addie, Rosario Bernardo Tan, a family law practitioner with 22 years of experience, whose number I had saved in my phone under insurance, since my mother made me put it there 2 weeks before the wedding. Just in case, my mother had said. Mama, that's terrible, I'd said. Put it in your phone, Maria. I put it in my phone. Attorney Bernardo Tan's office was on the 14th floor of a building in Ortigas. She was 50-something, wore her gray hair in a clean low bun, and had the kind of eyes that had heard every version of every story and were still paying attention. Her first question, after after I laid out what I'd found was not, "Are you sure?" or "Have you talked to him?" Her first question was, "Is the house in your name?" "Yes," I said, "solely. Paraphernal property, never commingled." She allowed herself the smallest smile. "Good, your mother was a wise woman." She was. "All right, Maria, here's what we do." What we did over the next 6 weeks was build a case the way you'd build a foundation, methodically, quietly, with materials that couldn't be disputed. Attorney Bernardo Tan connected me with a licensed private investigator named Dennis Aguilar, retired from the NBI, who wore button-down shirts and spoke in the unhurried manner of a man who had seen everything and been surprised by none of it. He charged $85,000 for a 3-week surveillance package. I paid it from a personal account Adrian didn't know existed. I'd opened it 3 years prior for what I'd told myself was independent savings, and what I now understood was a quiet internal alarm I'd never let myself fully hear. Dennis delivered his report on a Thursday. He sat across from me in a coffee shop in Katipunan and slid a manila envelope across the table. "Hotel receipts, 6 separate stays over 4 months, he said, voice flat and professional. 214 text messages, screenshots taken with consent from a source, photographs, and he paused briefly. "This is the part you'll want to brace for." I said, "Tell me." "She's pregnant. 7 months." I stared at the envelope in my hands. 7 months. I counted backward. He would have known. He would have known for months, and he had continued sleeping beside me, eating meals I cooked, letting me manage his finances, letting me be his wife, knowing. My tea went cold on the table. I did not cry in front of Dennis Aguilar. I waited until I was in my car, in the parking structure, alone in the dark. I cried for 9 minutes. I know it was 9 minutes because I watched the clock, and when the 9 minutes were up, I started making calls. The second professional I brought into this was Dr. Patricia Morales, an OBGYN at St. Luke's whom I'd been seeing for my annual checkups for 4 years. I made an appointment and went in the following week, not for the reason I'll eventually tell you that came later, but to confirm something I'd been quietly monitoring for about 10 days. I was, as it turned out, 5 weeks pregnant. Dr. Morales is warm and efficient in equal measure, the kind of doctor who gives you information and trusts you to handle it like an adult. She confirmed the pregnancy, ran the initial blood work, scheduled my next appointment. I sat in the parking lot of St. Luke's for a long time. This baby was mine. Whatever was about to happen in the coming weeks, the lawyers, the confrontations, the unraveling, this baby was mine, and this house was mine, and I was my mother's daughter, and no one was taking anything. I called Addie Bernardo Tan and told her. There was a brief pause. "Maria," she said, "this changes your position significantly. It does not change our strategy. If anything, it strengthens it." "I know," I said. "You haven't told Adrian?" "Not yet. Keep it that way for now." I kept it that way. I found out about the intervention. That's the only word for what they were planning. Through a phone call I wasn't supposed to hear. It was a Sunday. Adrian was in the backyard taking a call, and I was in the kitchen with the window open above the sink. He must have forgotten about the window, or maybe he'd simply stopped being careful. I heard him say, "Yes, Ma, Tuesday at 7, she'll be home." "No, I don't want a scene. I just want it to be, Ma, I know. Yes, bring Tito Roberto, bring Gina. Ariane has to come too. She has to be there so Maria understands this is real. I'm not a coward. I just, okay, Tuesday." He hung up. I stood at the sink with my hands under running water and let it run cold. Tuesday. They were planning an ambush. They were coming to my house with his pregnant mistress in tow to perform some kind of theatrical confrontation designed to overwhelm me into compliance. Lilibeth Villanueva, Adrian's mother, a woman who had never once acknowledged a mistake in her 61 years on this earth, had apparently decided the most efficient way to solve her son's infidelity was to make his wife simply disappear. I had 3 days. I used them well. I called a tie. Bernardo Tan, Monday morning, and walked her through everything. She spent 40 minutes on the phone with me laying out exactly what I could and could not say, what constituted legal threat versus protected speech, and how the penal provisions of the family code applied to what Adrian and Ariane had done. "Adultery," she said, "punishable under Article 333, criminal not just civil, and Ariane, as the knowing participant with a married man, faces concubinage charges under Article 334. The evidence Dennis gathered is admissible. The hotel receipts, the messages, the photographs, that's Exhibit A through D right there. And the house? Paraphernal property, documented, uncontested. They cannot legally compel you to vacate. If they attempt to physically remove you, that's unlawful eviction on top of everything else." She paused. "Maria, I want to be direct with you. If they come to your home Tuesday evening intending what it sounds like they intend, you hold every card. Every card." That was the phrase I took with me into Tuesday. I want to describe what it was like to watch them file in. Lilibeth first, short, sharp-eyed, wearing the expression she always wore when she'd decided she was right about something, which was always. Then Roberto, my father-in-law, a heavy-set man who communicated primarily in grunts and had never, in 5 years, asked me a single question about my life. Then Gina, Adrian's younger sister, who had the family's soft face and twice its talent for moral convenience. Her husband Thomas, who had the decency to look uncomfortable. And then, finally, Adrian with Ariane at his side. Ariane. She was smaller than I'd expected from the photographs, pretty in the luminous way of very young women who haven't yet been worn down by anything. She wore a loose floral dress and flat sandals, and she walked into my house with her hand in Adrian's and her eyes moving slowly around the room like she was taking inventory. She sat in my mother's chair. I watched her settle into it, and that was the moment. Not the hotel receipt, not the investigator's report, not Not even the Tuesday phone call. That was the moment I felt something cold and clear move through me from crown to soul. Not rage. Something colder than rage. Something that felt like absolute crystalline certainty. I had set out tea. I want you to understand that. Before they arrived, I had made tea, arranged cups, put out a small plate of biscuits. Not out of hospitality. I needed them seated, comfortable, invested in their performance. I needed them to believe they were in control of this room. I sat in the armchair across from them. Not my mother's chair. I sat in the wooden framed one near the bookshelf, and I watched them arrange themselves. The unified front, the family tribunal, and then I waited. Lilybeth placed her teacup down with a deliberate clink that was somehow both delicate and authoritative, a woman who had practiced that sound. "Maria," she said, folding her hands in her lap, "what's done is done. We're all adults here. Ariane is carrying our grandchild. A blessing, Maria, whatever the circumstances. You need to accept reality and step aside so that everyone can move forward in peace." She had not asked how I was doing. She would not ask. "You've served this family well," she continued, which I found nearly remarkable in its condescension, "and we're grateful. But you have to understand that the situation—" "I understand the situation perfectly," I said pleasantly. Brief silence. She pressed on. "Good. Then you know that Ariane and Adrian need—" "I wasn't finished," I said. Lilybeth blinked, but Gina jumped in before the silence could settle. "Maria, look, you don't have children. Ariane does. That's just nature. If you agree to an uncontested divorce, you can both start fresh. No ugliness. No ugliness," I repeated. "Yes, exactly. You brought a pregnant woman to my house to pressure me into leaving it," I said, "and you're asking me to avoid ugliness." Gina opened her mouth, closed it. Roberto cleared his throat. "We need to think about the child. Adrian needs a stable home, this home, to raise his son properly. It would be best if you found somewhere else to stay by the end of the month." "By the end of the month," I said softly. "Yes. You're not asking for a divorce. You're asking me to vacate the premises. It's just practical." "It's eviction," I said. "You're attempting to evict me from my own property to install your son's mistress." Ariane shifted in my mother's chair. She pressed her hand to her belly and cast her eyes down in a performance of wounded innocence that might have worked on an audience less well-researched than me. "I don't want to hurt anyone," she said quietly. "I truly don't. But Adrian and I love each other. Every child deserves a father and a stable home." She let her eyes travel slowly around the room, the high ceilings, the Philippine hardwood floors my mother had chosen, the Capiz shell pendant light, the wall of books. She was already redecorating. I felt the royal flush in my hands. I stood up, not dramatically, not in a rush. I stood the way my mother used to stand before she said something that ended an argument, with the unhurried calm of someone who has already won and is simply getting to her feet to collect her winnings. I walked to the side table and poured myself a glass of water from the pitcher I'd left there. The condensation was cold against my fingertips. I drank 2 measured sips, set it down. I turned to face them. "If you're finished," I said, "then it's my turn." The room went completely quiet. They had expected tears. Women in this position are supposed to cry, supposed to beg or rage or do something messy and emotional that could be dismissed later as hysteria. They were not expecting my voice to be level. They were not expecting my hands to be still. They were not expecting ice. "You're operating under several significant misconceptions," I said. "I'd like to correct them." Adrian was staring at me. I couldn't read his expression anymore. I wasn't sure I'd ever been able to. "First," I said, "the house." I looked at Lilybeth, at Roberto, at Gina with her hand on Tomas's arm. "This house is registered exclusively under my maiden name, Maria Concepcion de los Reyes. Paraphernal property, meaning property I owned before and apart from this marriage, excluded from the community of assets by explicit legal classification. Adrian's name does not appear on the title. It never has." I let that sit for 5 full seconds. "That means you cannot compel me to leave. You have no legal standing in this property whatsoever. You are guests in my home, uninvited guests who, I'll note, let themselves in with a key belonging to a man who does not own this house." Lilybeth's jaw tightened. "Maria, we know you're upset." "I'm not upset, Lilybeth. I'm clarifying." I took 1 step forward. "Second, you came here to discuss peaceful divorce. I want to discuss what a peaceful divorce would actually cost your family." Roberto's face was reddening. "Now, just a minute. Adultery," I said. "Article 333 of the revised penal code. Criminal offense. The married woman who takes a lover, or in this case, the married man, and the person knowingly participating." I turned to Ariane. "Both can be prosecuted. Both can serve prison time." Ariane had gone quite pale. "I have Dennis Aguilar's full report," I continued. "Mr. Aguilar is a former NBI investigator with 19 years of service who spent 3 weeks documenting this affair. I have hotel receipts from 6 separate stays, 214 text messages, and photographs. My attorney, Rosario Bernardo Tan, has had the report since last week. It's organized into exhibits A through D." Adrian was on his feet. Maria, please, can we just— "You're in my house, Adrian," I said quietly. "Sit down." He sat. I have never in my life experienced the sensation of telling my husband to sit and having him do it instantly, without argument. It was not satisfying in the way I'd imagined power would be. It was just accurate, like a calibration. "Adrian's employer," I continued, "has a morality clause in his employment contract. I've reviewed it. An adultery conviction, or even a credible criminal filing, would almost certainly constitute grounds for termination." I paused. "I mention this not as a threat, but as context. This is the landscape you're asking me to navigate peacefully." The room was completely still. Gina's face had gone the color of old paper. whisper. And Ariane. I said her name the way you'd say a word in a language you don't speak. Neutral, flat, precisely enunciated. You're 7 months pregnant. I genuinely hope for your child's sake that you have considered what a criminal proceeding would mean for the next 5 years of your life. I'm not saying I'll pursue all of this. I'm saying I can. My attorney says I have an excellent case. Ariane's eyes were bright with tears that for once I thought might be real. Think of the child, Gina said, her voice thin now, the bravado entirely gone. I am thinking of a child, I replied. I paused. Mine. The room went wrong in an interesting way. Adrian frowned. It was a specific kind of frown. The frown of a man who has just been handed information his brain is refusing to process correctly. What? He said. I was at St. Luke's yesterday. I said. Routine appointment, Dr. Patricia Morales, OBGYN, 12 years in practice. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and produced the folded copy of the sonogram. Real, actual, printed. I held it up briefly and then put it away. I'm 5 weeks pregnant. What happened next was not a reaction so much as a detonation. Ariane made a sound, small and airless like something deflating. She pressed both hands to her stomach and slumped back in my mother's chair. Adrian lurched forward, actually lurched like someone had shoved him, and his expression did something I had never seen Adrian's expression do before in 5 years of marriage. It collapsed entirely, every layer at once, leaving something raw and terrified underneath. You're Maria, his voice cracked. You're pregnant? I just said that. Why didn't you? He stopped. He knew why. The reason was in this room with him, sitting in the ivory armchair with tears running down her face. Lilibeth had gone from steel to scramble in approximately 4 seconds. She stood up so fast her teacup rattled on the saucer. Oh God, Maria! She was crossing the room toward me, arms already opening, face already reconstructed into warmth. Why didn't you say something? This changes everything. We're family. You know we love you. You didn't love me 11 minutes ago, I said pleasantly, taking a small step back. She stopped. 11 minutes ago you were asking me to clear out by end of month. I didn't mean, you meant exactly what you said. The calculation has changed for you, that's all. I have a legitimate heir now and the optics are different. I cocked my head slightly, but I haven't finished. The scramble froze. The baby, I said, may not be Adrian's. I want to tell you that I had prepared for every reaction in that room. I had not fully prepared for Adrian's face. He went a color I can only describe as extinguished, like every light in him switched off simultaneously. He stared at me across the living room of the house his mother had just tried to hand to another woman, and his mouth opened and did not produce sound. What? He said finally. It came out flat, not a question, a kind of stunned repetition. I won't confirm paternity until after the divorce proceedings are complete, I said, voice very steady. Given the circumstances, I think the court will understand my hesitation. It was a bluff. Let me be clear about this. It was an absolute bluff. The baby was Adrian's, completely and without question, and I knew it. But guilt is an extraordinary mirror. When you have done the thing you're accused of, accusation becomes confession. Adrian had been unfaithful for at least 8 months. He had no moral ground to stand on and every reason to believe I might have found the same escape route he had. His guilt made him certain it was possible. His certainty was the point. Lilibeth sat back down heavily in her chair. Roberto said something low and indistinct that sounded like a curse. Gina had her hand over her mouth. Tomas had the expression of a man who very much wished he had stayed home. Ariane was crying openly now, which she had every right to do. Her situation was genuinely hard. I did not feel nothing about that. But she had come into my house with 6 people and sat in my dead mother's chair and looked around my rooms like she was choosing curtains, and I had no softness left for her tonight. I walked to the front door. I opened it. The evening air came in. October in Quezon City. Cooler than the season usually allowed, carrying the faint smell of rain somewhere in the distance. I held the door and turned back to the room. I've already filed preliminary paperwork with Atelier Bernardo Tan, I said. This house is legally mine. That's documented and unambiguous. You're all trespassing right now, technically, given that my husband's residency here is contingent on our marriage, which I am in the process of dissolving. I checked my watch, a round-faced Seiko my mother had left me. I'd like you to leave. If you're not gone in 5 minutes, I will call the police. And Ariane, if I hear of any further contact from you regarding this property or my life, my attorney will file a civil suit for psychological and emotional damages. That's on top of the criminal option. Nobody moved for a moment. They were looking at me the way people look at a weather phenomenon, something they had not factored into their plans, something outside the range of what they'd prepared for. 1 minute gone, I said. Lilibeth moved first. She gathered herself with the strained dignity of a woman who has never admitted defeat and has therefore invented complex internal fictions to explain every loss. She did not look at me as she walked past. Roberto followed, heavy-footed and quiet. Gina pulled Thomas by the arm and they left without speaking. Ariane rose from the ivory armchair. She stood there for a moment and I watched her. I watched her face, the youth of it, the real tears on it, the complicated future written across it. I felt something. Not guilt, not cruelty. Something more like, this is what his choices built. This is the wreckage of a soft-faced man. She left. Adrian was last. He stood in the doorway for a long time. He had the look of someone trying to find a version of this moment where something was salvageable and coming up empty. His eyes were red. Maria. His voice was barely above a whisper. The baby. Is it actually? Goodbye, Adrian. He stood there another moment, then he walked out. I closed the door. The lock clicked. That sound, clean, definitive, a small mechanical fact, went all the the way through me. I stood alone in my house for a while. In my mother's house. I put my hand on my stomach. 5 weeks. A fact. A small, solid, entirely real fact in the wreckage of what had been my marriage. I walked back to the living room and stood in front of the ivory armchair. I smoothed the embroidered edge with my fingertips, the same edge Ariane had been touching, and I stood there until the room felt like mine again. It didn't take long. 6 months later, the divorce was finalized on a Tuesday at Cheshire. Bernardo Tan called me at 10:22 in the morning, and her voice had the particular satisfied flatness of a woman who had done her job completely. The house remained in my name, uncontested. Adrian's legal team had initially floated the idea of challenging the property classification, and Attorney Bernardo Tan had, in her words, addressed that quickly. They withdrew the challenge within 2 weeks. I did not pursue the criminal charges, not because I was soft, I want to be clear about that, but because I had calculated, the way my mother always calculated, what justice would actually cost me in time and money and attention, and what it would actually produce. The divorce was the point. The house was the point. The child was the point. Adrian lost his job anyway, not from a criminal filing, from a colleague who'd seen him with Ariane at a hotel lobby 3 months before any of this came to a head, and, once the separation became publicly known in their office, mentioned it to HR. The morality clause took care of the rest. He is, as far as I know, living in a rented apartment in Marikina. Ariane had the baby, a boy, as Lilybeth had always said. I don't know the details, and I don't seek them. I sent a congratulations card. I want to be honest about that. I don't know entirely why I did it. Maybe because the child is genuinely not at fault for any of this. Maybe because my mother would have. My own child, a girl, as it turned out, was born in April. Dr. Morales delivered her at St. Luke's at 6:43 in the morning, and she came out with her eyes open, which the nurses said was unusual, and she looked around the room with the calm curiosity of someone assessing a situation. I recognized that look immediately. I named her Elena. She sleeps in the room my mother painted yellow in 1989, under the Capiz shell light I've never changed, in the house that has always been ours. Some days I walk through these rooms and I try to feel the ghost of that terrible evening, the teacups, the 6 people, the pregnant woman in the ivory chair. I look for whatever scar it left. Mostly what I feel is something I can only describe as cleaned, like a surface after all the compromises have been stripped away, and what's left is just the true material underneath. Hard, durable, mine. My mother used to say that there are 2 kinds of women in the world. Women who wait to see what they're left with, and women who decide from the start what they're keeping. She built this house with her hands and her absence and her will. She put my name on the title. She put a lawyer's number in my phone. She told me, don't be soft. I wasn't soft. I closed the door on the whole wretched parade of them, stood in the house my mother built, and decided what I was keeping. Elena and I are keeping everything.